So in this segment, I want to discuss, Labour kind of committing to the two-child cap and other kind of weird policies that they've got. They've said they're going to raise more money through clamping down on tax evasion and things like that, or avoidance, which is fine. But I think this is a really awful answer from Rachel Reeves.
Just last week, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown said, quote, "The two-child rule is inequitous. The majority of three-child families are now in poverty, and that's a terrible indictment on our country." Will you scrap that policy?
Well, as I said, I'm not going to make any commitments without saying where the money is going to come from, because the people who pay the price when you pay fast and loose with the public finances...
Again, this is nonsense. This is about the Liz Truss stuff. Like, we saw New Labour finance a war on borrowing, the Iraq War. We saw a lot of the COVID money come from borrowing. So this whole thing about fast and loose, this is nonsense. It's around the Liz Truss thing where, borrowers were shook around, like the tax cuts and things like that.
Is ordinary.
Not borrowers, sorry, bond purchases.
Working families.
You know as well as anyone that tax and spending is a game of priorities. You could say right now that your priority is to scrap this rule on a two-child benefit limit and bring hundreds of thousands of families out of poverty. You can make that your priority right now. You could just say that you do, and you'll find the money somewhere.
Find the money somewhere. I mean, that sounds very Liz Truss. I'm not going to take that approach.
It doesn't, does it? You can find it from existing budgets. That's what that could mean.
I'm going to make sure
but
that
you could make it your priority. You could say right now, that's my priority.
Let me tell you about some of our...
We'll get to that in a few minutes, actually, because something did crop up after a couple of days after this interview.
Priorities. We would get rid of the tax breaks, which means at the moment private schools don't pay VAT or business rates, and we'll put that money, every single penny of it, into young people at our state schools where 93% of kids are educated. We would get rid of...
I think that's been allocated into breakfast clubs. No, I think Labour need to be clear on where the money is going to come from. Since they're taking this fiscal road, this route, where the money's come from, where it's being allocated to, because I think the Tories will easily say, "Oh, didn't you allocate that for something else?" I think that's what we're going to see a lot of.
The system where private equity bosses don't pay income tax on their bonuses, and we would put that money into frontline public services. Those are Labour priorities, and I think they are also the priorities of the British people.
Well, let's do a quick...
I assume, changing capital gains tax to be in line with income tax would also be one of the priorities of the British people. So why don't you do that? That one's an easy one.
Quick fire round. So as of the 1st of April, a parent with a 2-year-old is eligible for 15 hours of free childcare. Are you going to be keeping that?
We will deliver the entitlements that the government have set out.
That's great. That's a yes. That's a yes. We'll keep the yes.
The problem is, though, the Tories' current childcare plan is completely unsustainable. A lot of nurseries have come out and said, the amount of money the Tories are giving in terms of funding is unsustainable. So this is going to be a really bad egg that Labour are going to inherit.
OK, then there will be an extension to working parents of the 9 months from September.
I think I've just answered all your questions. We are committed to the promises that parents have been made.
One of the promises from September 2025, which is well after the next election...
I've just answered all of your questions. We will honour the commitments that have been made to parents.
So the 330 hours a week from September 25... Yes or no? Are you committing to that?
I just have already committed.
So that's a yes. That's a yes.
But
great.
Paul, if
just say yes, then. Just stop being weird. Just say yes.
Listen to the answers. I'm committing that we will honour the commitments that have been made to parents, because parents need to be able to plan for the future.
OK, so, talking about the two-child cap, in terms of the poverty, let's see, there was a bit where Rayner said it was, described the policy as obscene and inhumane, while Starmer himself tweeted at the time, "We must scrap punitive sanctions, two-child limit and benefit caps." And this was one of his leadership pledges to end kind of the Tories, really sanction-driven and, amongst other things, their welfare plans. So, again, that one's gone. This from Reeves.
Here alone, the tax cap increased by £5 billion. And that is money. When everyone else is seeing their tax go up, council tax going up, the tax thresholds frozen, so more people being dragged into paying tax, it is right then that we make sure that everybody who should be paying tax is paying tax. And one of the specific things that we're announcing today is that the government's plans that they announced in March about non-DOMs, they said they were taking our policy. Well, it turns out they've taken it but left a load of loopholes in it.
And this is where Labour could, easily announce their policies And then when the Tories try and take them and implement them badly, they can say, look, these guys are out of ideas, they're taking ours, and they're not even doing them right. And that's where this is easy ground for Labour. That, they did that, I think they could have done that more around the windfall taxes, they're doing around the non-dom tax, and say, look, if you want our policies, just vote for us because we'll actually implement them properly.
And so if you are a non-dom, you can still get out of paying inheritance tax. And in the first year of their policy, there's a 50% discount. We don't get 50% discounts on our taxes. People who go out and work today, teachers, plumbers, doctors, nurses, they don't get a 50% discount. Why should some of the wealthiest people in the country get that discount? We would abolish that.
So this stuff on the non-doms is good. But then she comes out with this.
A lot of people watching right now will say they would like you to say, well, let's tax richer people more. If not working people, tax richer people.
Well, look, non-doms are some of the wealthiest people in this
country. I'm not talking about people who are not paying at the moment. I'm talking about, income tax on UK residents, richer people.
No, that's not my priority. My priority is making sure...
It could be, should be.
Well, they'll have a chance to express their views at the ballot box, but this is about...
So yeah, we're not in the business for increasing taxes on the rich. And, if you don't like it, vote for someone else. Express your views at the ballot box. If you have a party that want to support that, then she's saying vote for them. This is not how you win support. This is not it. People who talk about the polls endlessly, there was one clip from Sir John Curtis that's probably worth bringing up somewhere over here, which is Curtis saying we are looking at an election where it's much more about Tories losing votes rather than Labour winning them. So for the people who argue it's down to Labour's great policies like keeping the two-child cap and not increasing taxes on the rich. That's why Labour are winning. Okay, buddy. And again, if you want to argue with someone, argue with the actual polling expert who's saying this stuff in John Curtis, and actually state your evidence to the contrary at that point, because you're dealing with a guy who's an expert in this field. This from Starmer, they want to increase defence spending, as soon as resources allow. So they could easily say, as soon as the resources allow, we're going to get rid of the two-child cap and stuff like that. But no, they're going to use it for defence spending.
The argument that Keir Starmer is going to make today is that this is going to be the absolute foundation of Labour's defence policies. Visiting Barrow and Furness, where the nuclear submarines are made, he's going to be the first Labour leader in 30 years to do that, and he's going to say to voters, look, the party's changed its position. Cast your mind back to 2019. Labour said, yes, we'll renew nuclear weapons at the moment, but ultimately we want to get rid of them and work with other countries to get rid of them.
There's nothing wrong with multilateral disarmament if a lot of other countries decide together, if most other countries decide together we want to get rid of nuclear weapons or at least reduce the potency of them or, distance or whatever. There's nothing wrong with multilateral disarmament. Unilateral disarmament, where it's only one person disarming, that I wouldn't want the UK to do, because we do still live in a dangerous world.
So Keir Starmer is saying today, that's not my position anymore. I want to keep them for decades. So today he's going to say that Labour will build 4 new submarines at Barrow and Furness. That's a commitment that he's making to try and help the economy.
So, again, it will help the economy to an extent, but do you know what I think would help the economy more? Getting rid of the stupid benefit sanctions and stuff like that, getting rid of the two-child cap, because that money will go to parents and it will go back into the economy rather than wasting that on more nuclear submarines. Honestly, if you want to talk about money coming back to the economy, getting rid of the two-child cap, you're talking about more kids out of poverty, kids being less hungry in school, being able to actually function better and actually do better in academics, potentially. Kids that won't have long-term health problems, so that's less money needed for the NHS in those areas. You're talking about multiple benefits here. So the argument of, we'd increase spending on defence and that's going to help our economy, sure, but there are better ways, and that's what the guy originally was talking about. The interview here was talking about these are political choices, and he's absolutely 100% correct. This is a choice. If it's the case that the economy does grow under Labour and Labour say we're going to increase defence spending, they have made a conscious choice to spend that money on defence spending rather than on kids who need help.
As well, he's going to say that the nuclear at-sea deterrent, continuous at-sea deterrent, which basically means there's a submarine somewhere in the world at all times, that will continue under Labour. And finally, and I think this is the really important bit, he's going to say Labour's committed to all upgrades that the system needs. That's designed, Labour say, to be a multi-decade commitment. So Labour, under Keir Starmer, saying today, we're going to do this for a very long time. And that.
And so, again, like, if the economy was doing better and you want to spend more on defence, especially because, we do live in a dangerous world, that's fine. But, at the end of the day, like, we live in a country where we're penalising families for having more than 2 kids. And it's a bit weird, the statement, the way Reuters have worded it, saying the Conservatives, traditionally seen as the party likely to spend on defence, promised in March that spending would grow to 2.5% of GDP as soon as economic conditions allow. But for whatever reason, BBC Breakfast have attributed that to Starmer. So I don't know what's going on with that one. But if it's the case the Tories wanted to boost defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, I guess Labour are saying that because the Tories are going to do it anyway, so they're just kind of trying to steal the ground on the Tories. But again, like, when Labour asked how are you going to pay for it, I guess they can argue, well, we're going to grow the economy and that's going to pay for it. But then, like, is defence spending going to be the priority if you grow the economy? Like, is there nothing else? Like, would you allocate that money to defence first rather than anything else? If you look at the UK's defence spending, it's around 2% plus, which is obviously the NATO target. But the problem with that is one of the problems the UK has is even though we spend a lot of money on defence more than other NATO members, and around the 2% mark, the way the money is allocated is a major problem. A major problem. I think there's a lot of corruption and other things within procurement, and a lot of, like, the MOD asking for stuff like and making things overly complicated. There was a video by Aurora Graphics, I'll try and link it below, where they discuss this kind of stuff. And so this is Reeves again on Channel 4, and Channel 4, they seem to do the best work at interviewing Reeves, honestly.
MRC crackdown. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says today it probably is the case that if you put more money and effort in, I think you're talking about spending £500 million for more staff, you will get more back. The difficulty is it is genuinely uncertain how much that will raise.
Well, these aren't my numbers that I've plucked out of thin air. The head of the National Audit Office gave a speech in January where he said the tax gap, which is £36 billion, that's the gap between the tax that is owed and that is actually collected, is £36 billion. And he says that you could realistically bring in £6 billion of that. So many people who want to do the right thing
The criticism is already that this is small change in every sense. It's small in monetary terms, but in policy terms too. And surely polling suggests that people are crying out for real change. And they won't necessarily view this as real change, will they?
I just don't accept the premise of your question. £5 billion to
Classic Conservative answer that.
invest in frontline public services, 2 million additional appointments in our NHS, free breakfast clubs for every single child at primary school, 700,000...
But the thing is that Labour already promised that with the non-dom tax and the school VAT thing. So this isn't new per se, it's just the money's being allocated from elsewhere. But obviously it's a bit dicey if you're saying, we can invest this money into HMRC and they'll get this kind of return. I think that's a dicier argument. Because, again, like, HMRC are against some of the best lawyers around when it comes to tax evasion, best accountants around as well. It's a bit difficult. I'm not saying not to do this, but I'm saying I wouldn't gamble on the amount it can bring in. But also the fact that they could have announced this ages ago in tandem with their other policies and said, like, we're going to bring this money in as well, we'll use that for other policies.
And emergency dental appointments. That is what people are crying out for.
£5 billion. The £28 billion Green Plan you had was radical, but it's gone. Reversing the two-child benefit cap limit, which many people within your own party would like to have seen you do, would have been radical, would have changed the lives of hundreds of thousands of children. That's gone. Isn't there a danger that in prioritising looking fiscally sensible, Labour looks scared and cowardly?
I mean, when you look at it, like, whenever the media pull up, whenever the Tories attack Labour on certain policies and the media latch onto it, Labour kind of cower away from it. That's what happened at the 28 billion. Because they didn't cancel that policy around when Liz Truss crashed the economy. They cancelled that, I think it was a few months ago this year. So it was well after Liz Truss, tanked the economy. So the argument they make about unfunded promises is simply not true.
Well, when you play fast and loose with the public finances, when you can't say where the money is
you play fast and loose with IQ points, your brain can go dumb.
Going to come from, this is what happens. Mortgage rates go through the roof, pensions are put in peril, and ordinary working families are left picking up the pieces for governments that mismanage the economy. That's what happened when the Conservatives brought in their mini-budget.
I really want to see the media push back on this narrative because it's simply not true.
I will never play fast and loose with the public finances because I would never put families in this country in that position.
But do you accept that you look scared? You look scared, you look cowardly, you look like you're not going to back any big plans.
Well, you could say that Liz Truss and the Conservatives are bold, but their boldness has meant that people are paying hundreds of pounds every...
I mean, this is not an argument about being bold or ambitious. This is what you're saying is, well, Liz Truss was bold and ambitious, so we shouldn't do the same. It's just so dumb.
Single year in higher mortgage payments. That may be bold, but it is utterly reckless.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies today says children who...
She's doing a good job interviewing, but I think there are better ways to ask these questions, better follow-up questions you can ask. It drives me nuts a little bit.
lived near Sure Start centres did better at GCSEs, with the most pronounced change in the poorest communities, with children, ethnic minority communities. Exactly the sort of people and families Labour ought to be in politics for. Would you recommit to the idea of bringing back Sure Start?
The last Labour government did amazing things, lifted children out of poverty, raised living standards and invested in frontline public services. And we will do that again.
What about returning to Sure Start? Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, says the country is crying out for that. The most disadvantaged are crying out for that. Would you commit to that? Is that an idea you're looking?
I'm not going to make any policy commitments that aren't fully costed and fully funded. But part of the package that I've announced just today is about having free breakfast clubs at all primary schools.
It's not the same as Sure Start, is it? It's nothing like that.
No, and I certainly know what Sure Start did and the difference that it made. But the policy that we're announcing today is about having breakfast clubs in all primary schools. Breakfast clubs are both a policy about giving all kids a good start in life, but also to help parents to earn more money.
Sure Start was a policy that is still working today for those children. That the IFS says children who were lucky enough to live near a Sure Start centre will have better opportunities in life because their GCSE exams will be better.
Yeah.
Gordon Brown says we need it again, and clearly Labour should be backing.
Well, look, I'm under no illusions about the scale of the inheritance that I will face if I become...
I mean, yeah, it's just kind of... I think the more I think the public see this side of Labour, I don't know if the public will back it. I don't know. It depends on how much the public believe the economy's cooked and that the government can't do anything. This is kind of what David Cameron really pushed on the people. But I think if people say, well, you know, I pay all this money in tax and I'm not getting much back for it, I think that's going to be the key change, I think, in public opinions. Especially with Labour saying, oh, you can't really do much. We're going to keep some of the worst of Tory policy in by the looks of things. But then, you know, as soon as resources allow, we're going to increase defence spending as a percentage of GDP to 2.5%. I don't know. I think that's a bit dicey in my opinion. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.